this was a conspiracy theory that was basically being planted by the United States of America. These are recent live images that we are getting in right now of the Chinese premier. Let's listen in.
It shows professional recommendations. In the meantime, international macroeconomic policy coordination should be stepped up, and the global industrial and supply chains be kept stable and unclogged if we are to restore growth to the economy of the world. Sixth, we must strengthen international cooperation. Mankind is a community with a shared future. Solidarity and cooperation is our most powerful weapon for defeating the virus. This is the key lessons the world has learned from fighting HIV/AIDS, Ebola, avian influenza, H1N1, and other major epidemics. And solidarity and cooperation is a sure way through which we, the people of the world, can defeat this novel coronavirus. Mr. President, China stands for the vision of building a community with a shared future for mankind. China takes it as its responsibility to ensure not just the life and health of its own citizens, but also global public health. For the sake of boosting international cooperation against COVID-19, I would like to announce the following. China will provide $2 billion over 2 years to help with COVID-19 response and with economic and social development in affected countries, especially developing countries. China will work with the UN to set up a global humanitarian response depot and hub in China, ensure the operation of anti-epidemic supply chains, and foster green corridors for fast-track transportation and customs clearance. China will establish a cooperation mechanism for its hospitals to pair up with 30 African hospitals and accelerate the building of the Africa CDC headquarters to help the continent ramp up its disease preparedness and control capacity. COVID-19 vaccine development and deployment in China, when available, will be made a global public good. This will be China's contribution to ensuring vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing countries. China will work with other G20 members to implement the debt service suspension initiative for the poorest countries. China is also ready to work with the international community to bolster support for the hardest hit countries under the greatest strain of debt service so that they could tide over the current difficulties. To conclude, I call on all of us to come together and work as one. Let's make concerted efforts to protect the health and life of people in all countries. Let's work together to safeguard planet Earth, our common home. Let's work together to build a global community of health for all. I thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was the Chinese president talking about how exactly is China responding to all the allegations that have been leveled against them. In fact, China making it absolutely clear that they are willing to support all developing nations. Also, aid has already been announced by the Chinese president. But is this enough? Let me go across to our executive editor, Abhishek Kapoor. Abhishek, who got us the world exclusive as far as the agenda of WHA is concerned. Abhishek, you've heard what the Chinese president had to say. Is this enough? Because given the fact that some serious allegations have been leveled against China, and China's Sushant Sareen was also pointing out, was trying to browbeat various nations. But today, it does appear that they appear to be at least on the back foot.
Listen, it's not about big enough, Shavan. You know, what is $2 billion? So China is doing what they do best, try to shut up everyone's mouth by pumping and throwing money at them. President Xi Jinping said that they will fund $2 billion to developing countries, Africa, this, that. Once the vaccine comes, they will share it with the world. Everyone would do it. But the point is, what about the trillions of dollars of losses that the world economy has suffered because of the shutdowns and all the revival packages that are coming in and the human suffering and the tragedies that are folding. There was no word on that from the Chinese. And that is something which really reflects very poorly on the manner in which the Chinese have really brazened it out in terms of not being, forget about being apologetic, but not, even acknowledging that there were some mistakes that they made, perhaps because of which this virus contagion became the pandemic that it did. So I believe, unfortunately, I would say it was not a statesmanly address that Xi Jinping made. He did show, intent insofar as cooperating with the rest of the world is concerned. But obviously, when the entire world is against you, you can't, say that you will not cooperate. The investigation will happen, irrespective of whether Chinese scientists join it or not. They will ultimately have to, because China also understands that it cannot really stand completely isolated. So in that sense, some stops were announced in terms of $2 billion worth of aid and fight with COVID, getting the vaccine for the rest of the world, a specific focus on Africa and some other developing countries. But, I was expecting at least some kind of, remorse, some kind of accepting that some mistakes were made, but that never happened. So I believe, unless I missed some part of it, I was hearing on my EP. But what is important is that as rest of the nations speak, there would be a pattern that you would see, that everyone is very angry at the manner in which this pandemic was allowed to go out of hand between China and WHO, of course, and that's why this investigation is important at two levels. One, it wants to zero down on the origin, which is obviously China, and then it wants to investigate the WHO also. Remember, Shavan, over the next 2 days, beginning today, possibly India would be taking over as chairman of the Executive Council of the WHO, and that means that the world would be looking up to India, not just in terms of in whichever manner we have behaved, not just by containing the virus within India, but in terms of cooperating with everyone, sending them medicines, cooperating in terms of evacuations, but also when we take over as chairman of the Executive Council in terms of guiding this investigation so that it is independent and credible.
Right. Well, just to take it from where you left, Abhishek, because the IMF also basically points out that since the Great Depression, this is perhaps the steepest slowdown that we are essentially looking at. And China, the kind of response that has really come in, one would say that this is certainly not enough, given the fact that very little that's been spoken about the way they essentially responded in the first half, or at a time when they should have responded. There was absolute radio silence on the part of the Chinese authorities. We'll continue tracking this very big story. In fact, Republic TV was the first channel to get you exclusive details of this particular agenda that would take place at the WHO. We'll get you all the latest.